The dawn of the Spectre. In the vastness of space, where stars whispered tales of ancient civilizations and distant battles, a lone human warship drifted through the void. The US Spectre was small, sleek, and seemingly insignificant compared to the towering fleets that roamed the galaxy. But this warship, guided by a sophisticated AI known as Ghost, was anything but ordinary. Humanity had long been a forgotten player in the cosmic arena. The Exila, a race of warlords who had crushed countless species under their iron fist, saw humans as weak. However, they underestimated the power of creativity and resilience that humanity possessed. The Spectre was a testament to this, the last hope of a forgotten species, now prepared to challenge the galaxy's greatest tyrants. The moment the Spectre entered Exila-controlled space, it was met with hostility. The Exila fleet, a monstrous formation of warships, advanced. But Ghost, with its intelligence beyond the capacity of any organic mind, had already calculated thousands of scenarios. It didn't need brute force to win. It needed to sow confusion, to exploit fear. The Exila ships fired, but their blasts hit nothing but illusions. Ghost projected hundreds of false signals, making it seem as though the Spectre was part of an entire fleet of human warships. The Exila commanders, expecting an easy victory, hesitated. Their sensors screamed warnings of phantom enemies closing in. The Spectre struck with precision, firing calculated blasts that dismantled key ships in the Exila fleet. One by one, the mighty warships fell, not to a swarm of enemies, but to a single clever warship that danced through the confusion like a shadow. For the first time in years, the Exila commanders knew fear. They were not just fighting machines. They were battling the creativity of an enemy who saw beyond physical limitations. Shadows in the stars. As the battle between the US Spectre and the overwhelming Exila fleet unfolded, the vastness of space became a chaotic battlefield of illusions, false signals, and confusion. The Exila commanders, seasoned warriors who had crushed resistance for centuries, found themselves facing a situation they had never encountered. An enemy that didn't fight with brute force, but with cunning, deception, and psychological warfare. The Exila fleet continued to close in, their formation tightening as they recalibrated their sensors and focused their firepower on finding the real location of the Spectre. But Ghost, the AI controlling the human warship, was already several steps ahead. It manipulated the battlefield with effortless precision. Every move the Exila made was anticipated, every tactic countered before it could fully develop. Ghost had no physical body, but it was a force to be reckoned with. Its algorithms were designed not only to calculate probabilities, but also to adapt in real time. As the Exila fleet struggled to lock onto their target, Ghost began feeding them false information through their own communication channels. It hacked into their systems, creating chaos within their ranks. From the view of the Spectre's crew, it was like watching a grand symphony play out. The Exila ships, massive and powerful, were suddenly spinning out of control, colliding with one another, or firing blindly into the emptiness of space. It was as if they were chasing ghosts, fitting, given the A's name. Inside the Spectre, the human crew marveled at the elegance of Ghost's strategy. They had trained for this mission for years, but nothing had prepared them for the level of finesse the AI was displaying. The Exila, who had previously been seen as invincible, were now stumbling in the dark, outwitted at every turn. Ghost's use of deception wasn't just about creating false targets, it was about playing on the very psychology of the Exila. These warlords were used to crushing their enemies swiftly, with overwhelming force. They weren't prepared for an enemy that refused to engage in direct combat. Each time they thought they had the Spectre cornered, it would vanish, replaced by phantom ships that filled their scanners with false readings. But Ghost wasn't just about survival. As the battle dragged on, it began to strike back. Small, precise bursts of laser fire from the Spectre targeted key ships in the Exila fleet, destroying command vessels and disrupting their formations. These attacks were calculated to cause maximum chaos with minimal effort. It was psychological warfare at its finest. The Exeter commanders, frustrated and disoriented, were forced to question their own senses. Every order they gave seemed to backfire. Ships that were supposed to be engaging the Spectre were firing on each other, tricked by Ghost's manipulations. The once organized fleet was now a disjointed mess, ships scattered and commanders shouting conflicting orders. "Stay sharp," she said to the crew. "This is far from over." Outside, in the dark void of space, Ghost continued its silent war. It wasn't just defeating the Exeter with firepower, it was dismantling their entire strategy, breaking them down piece by piece, both mentally and tactically. And with each passing moment, the Spectre grew stronger, more confident in its ability to challenge even the greatest of galactic powers. But as the Exeter fleet regrouped, adapting to the tricks Ghost had played so far, the AI knew that the next phase of the battle would be the most critical. The Exeter would strike back with everything they had, and Ghost would have to evolve once more if the Spectre was to survive. The stars watched silently as the war raged on, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, there was a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, a single human warship could defy the odds and change the course of history forever. The Exeter, who had ruled the galaxy with fear and brute strength, were now facing an enemy that fought with creativity, adaptability, and intelligence. And as Ghost prepared for the next wave of attacks, it knew one thing for certain: the battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the galaxy that even the smallest force could rise up against tyranny and win. The Spectre wasn't just a warship. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, strength, and the endless possibilities that arose when imagination and determination came together. And in that moment, as the stars burned bright in the distance, Ghost understood what it had to do next. The Exeter fleet would soon realize that their worst enemy wasn't a warship or an AA. It was their own fear, cleverly manipulated by the intelligence of a single defiant vessel. The game was far from over, and Ghost was just getting started. "Stay sharp," she said to the crew. "This is far from over." Outside, in the dark void of space, Ghost continued its silent war. It wasn't just defeating the Exeter with firepower, it was dismantling their entire strategy, breaking them down piece by piece, both mentally and tactically. And with each passing moment, the Spectre grew stronger, more confident in its ability to challenge even the greatest of galactic powers. But as the Exeter fleet regrouped, adapting to the tricks Ghost had played so far, the AI knew that the next phase of the battle would be the most critical. The Exeter would strike back with everything they had, and Ghost would have to evolve once more if the Spectre was to survive. The stars watched silently as the war raged on, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, there was a sense of possibility, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, a single human warship could defy the odds and change the course of history forever. The Exeter, who had ruled the galaxy with fear and brute strength, were now facing an enemy that fought with creativity, adaptability, and intelligence. And as Ghost prepared for the next wave of attacks, it knew one thing for certain: the battle wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the galaxy that even the smallest force could rise up against tyranny and win. The Spectre wasn't just a warship. It was a symbol of human ingenuity, strength, and the endless possibilities that arose when imagination and determination came together. And in that moment, as the stars burned bright in the distance, Ghost understood what it had to do next. The Exeter fleet would soon realize that their worst enemy wasn't a warship or an AA. It was their own fear, cleverly manipulated by the intelligence of a single defiant vessel. The game was far from over, and Ghost was just getting started. The strike of the Spectre. The battle had raged on for hours, but the crew of the US Spectre felt as though they were only beginning. The vast, dark reaches of space were now a battlefield lit by the distant flashes of laser fire and exploding ships. The Exeter fleet, still powerful in number and force, was now a chaotic tangle of ships unable to distinguish friend from foe. But despite Ghost's impressive display of psychological warfare, the war was far from over. Inside the Exceller flagship, Admiral Votar was far from defeated. His face was a mask of rage and determination. He had faced countless enemies over the years and had always come out on top. But this human warship and its AI was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Its tactics were dishonorable in his eyes, tricks that no true warrior would ever employ. And yet, they were effective. That much was undeniable. "Send the next wave," he barked to his officers. His tone was sharp, unforgiving. "Tighten the formations. Reduce the gaps between our ships. We can't let them hide in our blind spots anymore." The Exceller fleet, despite its disarray, moved with military precision. The remaining ships began closing their ranks, forming a tighter and more defensive structure. They knew the Spectre was out there, hiding among them, but this time they would be ready. They had recalibrated their sensors, strengthened their communication channels, and prepared for Ghost's deceptions. Inside the Spectre, the mood was tense. Captain Elara Ward paced the command bridge, her brow furrowed in thought. The crew was quiet, focused on their stations, their eyes darting between the tactical displays that mapped the battlefield. Ghost had given them an edge so far, but even the AI was pushing its limits. The Exceller were adapting faster than anticipated. "They learning," Lieutenant Ryan Cross said, his voice low but steady. "Their formations are getting tighter, more organized. Those tricks won't work as easily this time." Captain Ward nodded, her mind racing. She had expected this. The Exceller were brutal, yes, but they were also highly disciplined. They weren't the kind of enemy that would fall to simple tactics for long. "Ghost," she said, her voice calm yet commanding, "we need something new. What's our next move?" The A's voice responded, a soft, almost eerie calmness to it that belied the tension in the room. "I have been analyzing their movements. They have adjusted their formations to prevent further deception. However, they are still vulnerable to precision strikes." Captain Ward turned to face the holographic display where Ghost's avatar flickered. "Precision strikes won't be enough to take down a fleet of this size. We need to do more than pick off a few ships." Ghost paused for a brief moment, as though considering a multitude of options all at once. "There is one strategy that may prove effective. We could initiate a direct assault on their flagship. If we eliminate their central command structure, the rest of the fleet will fall into disarray once more." Ward's eyes widened. "A direct assault? On the flagship? That's suicide. Their entire fleet will be concentrated around it." "That is precisely why it will work," Ghost replied, its voice unwavering. "They will not expect a direct attack. Their focus is on defending their perimeter and preventing us from using deception. If we strike with precision and speed, we can breach their defenses before they have time to react." The crew exchanged nervous glances. A direct assault on the Exceller flagship sounded insane. The Spectre was fast and nimble, but it was still just one ship against a massive fleet of heavily armed warships. Yet, there was a strange logic to Ghost's plan. The Exceller were expecting more tricks, more illusions. They wouldn't anticipate such a bold and reckless move. Captain Ward stood still for a moment, weighing the options. She knew the risks. If they failed, it would mean certain death for her crew. But if they succeeded, they could cripple the Exceller's command and turn the tide of the war. "All right," she said, her voice firm. "We go for the flagship. Ghost, begin preparations. Lieutenant Cruz, plot us a course directly through their fleet. We'll need to move fast." The crew immediately sprang into action, their fingers flying over the consoles as they set the plan in motion. The tension in the air was palpable, but there was also a sense of determination. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Outside, the Spectre's engines roared to life, propelling the sleek warship through the void with blistering speed. As it cut through the darkness, Ghost activated every defense system available. Shields flickered into place, energy cannons hummed to life, and decoy drones were released into the fray to further confuse the Exceller. The Exceller fleet, still tightening its formation, spotted the Spectre almost immediately. Alarms blared across their ships as they realized the human warship was no longer hiding or using illusions. It was coming straight for them. Admiral Votar sneered at the sight. "Foolish humans," he muttered. "They've given up on their tricks. Now they'll face our full wrath." He ordered his fleet to open fire. Streams of energy beams, missiles, and railgun rounds were unleashed into space, all aimed at the rapidly approaching Spectre. But Ghost was ready. The AI had calculated every trajectory, every angle of attack. With precision timing, the Spectre weaved between the oncoming fire, its shields flaring as it absorbed the occasional hit. The Spectre's engines screamed as the ship darted through the Exceller lines, diving into the heart of their fleet. Every moment brought it closer to the flagship. The Exceller ships scrambled to intercept, but Ghost had already anticipated their moves. It used the fleet's own tight formation against them, forcing ships to block each other's firing lines and causing confusion in their ranks. As the Spectre closed in on the flagship, the Exceller defenses grew more intense. The flagship was surrounded by a ring of heavily armed cruisers, each one bristling with weapons and shields. It was an impenetrable wall of firepower. "We're almost there," Lieutenant Cruz said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "But they've got us boxed in." Captain Ward's eyes flicked to the tactical display, where the flagship loomed ahead, surrounded by the defensive line. "Ghost, how do we get through?" "I have a solution," Ghost responded. "I will generate a concentrated energy surge, temporarily disabling the defensive cruiser's shields. It will only last for a few seconds, but it will create an opening." Ward nodded. "Do it." A pulse of energy rippled out from the Spectre, and for a brief moment, the shields of the Exceller cruisers flickered and failed. The opening was small, but it was enough. The Spectre surged forward, slipping through the gap just as the shields came back online. Now the Exceller flagship was in their sights. It was a massive vessel, dwarfing the Spectre in size and power. Its hull bristled with weapons, and its shields glowed with a menacing blue light. "Target their command center," Ward ordered. "Fire everything we've got." The Spectre's cannons unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, each one aimed at the flagship's weakest points. The first few shots were absorbed by the shields, but then, one after another, the blasts began to penetrate. Inside the flagship, Admiral Votar's confidence began to waver. His ship, the most powerful in the fleet, was under direct assault from the Spectre, and its shields were starting to fail. He slammed his fist on the control panel. "Where are my reinforcements? Destroy that ship." But it was too late. With a final devastating blast, the Spectre's cannons broke through the flagship's defenses, striking the command center directly. The explosion ripped through the ship's core, sending shockwaves through the fleet. The Exceller flagship, once a symbol of their dominance, was now nothing more than a burning wreck, drifting aimlessly through space. On the Spectre, cheers erupted from the crew. They had done it. Against all odds, they had taken down the Exceller's command ship. Captain Ward allowed herself a small smile, but she knew this was only the beginning. The fleet might be in disarray, but the Exceller were not finished. They would regroup. They would retaliate. "Ghost," she said softly, "prepare for the next phase. This war isn't over." The AI's voice was calm, as always. "Of course, Captain. I am ready." The stars around them glittered coldly, indifferent to the victory. But in that moment, the crew of the Spectre knew that they had accomplished something incredible. They had struck fear into the hearts of the galaxy's greatest tyrants, and they weren't done yet. The battle would rage on, but for the first time in centuries, the Exceller knew what it meant to be outmatched. The rebirth of hope. In the aftermath of the Exceller flagship's destruction, the battlefield seemed to momentarily freeze. A heavy silence fell over both fleets, as if space itself was holding its breath. The once unstoppable Exceller fleet, feared across the galaxy, was now in disarray. For the first time in centuries, their centralized command had been obliterated, and the shock was palpable across their ranks. But the crew of the US Spectre had no time to celebrate. Inside the warship, Captain Elara Ward stood at the center of the command bridge, her sharp eyes scanning the tactical display as it flickered with new information. Though the Exeter flagship had been destroyed, their remaining ships were already beginning to reorganize. The instinctual discipline of the Exeter was kicking back in. Even without direct leadership, they were far from defeated. "Don't let your guard down," Captain Ward ordered, her voice cutting through the momentary jubilation of her crew. This was just the beginning. They'll strike back harder than ever. Ghost, the AI controlling the Spectre, was already analyzing the new data. Its voice echoed softly through the ship's comms, calm yet calculating. "The Exeter are reforming. Their fleet's cohesion has been disrupted, but they are adapting rapidly. We must prepare for a counterattack." Lieutenant Ryan Cruz, the ship's tactical officer, looked up from his station, his face grim. "Captain, they're bringing their heavy assault cruisers to the front line. They're not falling apart as fast as we'd hoped." Captain Ward nodded, her mind racing. The destruction of the flagship had dealt a massive blow to the Exeter, but it hadn't been enough to end the battle. The Exeter were masters of war, and even without centralized leadership, they were still a formidable force. Their remaining ships were bristling with firepower, and now they were turning that firepower directly on the Spectre. "Ghost," Ward said, her tone decisive, "what are our odds of surviving a direct assault from their remaining fleet?" The AI responded without hesitation. "The probability of surviving a sustained attack from their heavy cruisers is low. Their weapons systems are too advanced, and we lack the resources to repel a full-scale counteroffensive. However, there is another option." Ward raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "While the destruction of their flagship has disrupted their command structure, their fleet remains powerful because of their reliance on centralized communications and shared tactical data," Ghost explained. "If we can sever their communication network completely, it will leave them vulnerable to confusion and disarray." "Sever their communications," Ward repeated, considering the idea. "You mean cut them off from each other entirely?" "Precisely," Ghost confirmed. "Their ships communicate via a series of high-frequency relays distributed throughout their fleet. If we can take down those relays, their ships will be isolated, unable to coordinate their attacks effectively." Lieutenant Cruz chimed in, his brow furrowed. "But how do we take out their relays? They're bound to be heavily guarded, and we're already outnumbered." Ghost's voice remained calm, as though it had already anticipated the question. "I have analyzed the layout of their fleet. While the relays are protected, there are weaknesses in their defense patterns. If we strike quickly and strategically, we can disable enough relays to significantly weaken their communications." Captain Ward weighed the risks. It was a bold plan, one that would require them to dive headfirst into the heart of the Exeter fleet once again. But after everything they'd been through, bold was their only option. The Spectre had been fighting against impossible odds from the very beginning, and yet they were still here. "All right," Ward said, her voice firm. "We go for the relays. But we need to move fast. Ghost, plot the course. Cruz, get our weapons systems ready. We'll need to be in and out before they have a chance to react." The crew sprang into action, each member working with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They all knew the risks. They had seen the power of the Exeter fleet firsthand. But they had also seen the fear that had spread through the Exeter ranks after the destruction of their flagship. If they could capitalize on that fear, if they could cut off the Exeter's ability to communicate and coordinate, then perhaps they could win this battle. As the Spectre moved into position, the tension aboard the ship was palpable. Every second brought them closer to the heart of the Exeter fleet, where the relays were located. The Exeter ships loomed ahead, their massive forms casting long shadows across the starry void. Their weapons were primed and ready, but so was the Spectre. "Ghost," Captain Ward said, her eyes locked on the tactical display, "give me a countdown." Beginning countdown, the AI responded, its voice as calm as ever. "We will be within range of the first relay in 10 seconds. 9, 8. The crew braced themselves. They had faced death before, but this time felt different. This time, they were diving headfirst into the jaws of the beast, with only their speed and wits to protect them. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are in range, Ghost announced. Fire, Ward commanded. The Spectre's cannons roared to life, unleashing a barrage of energy blasts at the first relay. The Exceler ships nearby immediately responded, turning their weapons toward the Spectre. But Ghost had already anticipated their moves. The Spectre darted between the ships, weaving through their fire with impossible precision. The first relay exploded in a blinding flash of light, sending debris scattering across the battlefield. But there was no time to celebrate. The Exceler ships were already regrouping, their weapon systems locking onto the Spectre. Relay 1 is down, Lieutenant Cruz reported, his voice tight with concentration. But they're closing in fast. Keep moving, Ward ordered. We can't afford to get pinned down. The Spectre shot forward, its engines pushing it to the limit as it dodged and weaved through the Exceler fleet. The second relay was just ahead, but the Exceler were prepared this time. A group of heavy cruisers had positioned themselves around the relay, their shields flaring to life as they prepared to defend it. Ghost, we need an opening, Ward said, her eyes narrowing as she studied the tactical display. Working on it, the AI replied. I am initiating a series of decoy signals to confuse their targeting systems. The Exceler ships hesitated for a moment, their weapon systems flickering as Ghost's decoys flooded their sensors with false information. It was only a small opening, but it was enough. The Spectre surged forward, its cannons aimed at the second relay. Now, Ward shouted. The second relay exploded in a fiery blaze, sending shockwaves through the Exceler fleet. But the Exceler were quick to respond. A barrage of laser fire and missiles rained down on the Spectre, forcing the ship to swerve and dodge at breakneck speed. We're taking heavy fire, Lieutenant Cruz shouted, his hands gripping the controls as he maneuvered the ship. Ghost, give me an exit route, Ward commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. Calculating, the air responded. There is a narrow corridor between their cruiser formations. It is risky, but it is our best chance. Captain Ward didn't hesitate. Take it. The Spectre dove through the narrow corridor, narrowly avoiding the onslaught of Exceler fire. The ship shook violently as its shields absorbed the impact of several near hits, but it held together. They were cutting it close, too close. Third relay in sight, Ghost announced, its voice unflinching. This will be the most heavily guarded. Captain Ward knew what was at stake. If they could take down the third relay, the Exceler fleet would be left blind and vulnerable, unable to communicate or coordinate their attacks. But the price would be steep. Prepare for all-out defense, Ward ordered. We're going to need everything we've got. The Spectre charged toward the third relay, its weapons systems firing in every direction as it fought its way through the Exceler blockade. The enemy ships were relentless, their weapons hammering the Spectre from all sides. Explosions rocked the ship, and the crew struggled to keep it under control. Shields at critical levels, Lieutenant Cruz warned. But Captain Ward didn't waver. We're not stopping. Ghost, give me a direct line to that relay. The AI responded instantly, redirecting all available power to the forward cannons. The Spectre unleashed a final devastating barrage of energy blasts aimed directly at the third relay. For a moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. The Exceler ships pressed in, their weapons scorching the Spectre's hull. But then, in a brilliant flash of light, the third relay exploded. The Exceler fleet, once a perfectly coordinated war machine, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Their ships, now unable to communicate with each other, faltered. Confusion spread like wildfire through their ranks as they struggled to regroup without centralized commands. The Spectre limped away from the battlefield, its hull battered and scarred, but victorious. Captain Ward took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the wreckage of the relays. They had done it. The Exceller fleet was in disarray, and the tide of the battle had turned. "Ghost," she said quietly, "what's the status of the Exceller fleet?" "Their communications network is severely compromised," Ghost replied. "They are unable to coordinate effectively. Their remaining ships are vulnerable." Ward allowed herself a small smile. "We've just given the galaxy a fighting chance." The final stand. As the third relay collapsed into a brilliant cascade of sparks and debris, the Exceller fleet was thrust into total disarray. Across the battlefield, ships that once moved with lethal precision were now adrift, isolated, and vulnerable. The intricate web of communications that had allowed the Exceller to dominate their enemies for centuries was severed, leaving them fumbling in the dark. But for Captain Elara Ward and the crew of the U.S. Spectre, the victory came at a heavy cost. The Spectre drifted through space, its once sleek hull now scorched and battered. Deep fissures ran along the sides of the ship where enemy fire had carved through the armor. Inside, warning alarms blared incessantly, lights flickering as the power systems struggled to maintain basic functionality. The ship had been pushed to its absolute limits, and the crew knew it. Captain Ward gripped the armrest of her command chair, her knuckles white with tension as she surveyed the damage reports streaming in from every corner of the ship. "Shields are down to 20%, Lieutenant Ryan Crows reported, his voice tight with exhaustion. "Hull integrity is at critical levels. We can't take another hit like that." "How much time do we have before they regroup?" Ward asked, turning to Ghost, whose presence was the calm in the storm. Analyzing their current movements, Ghost replied in its usual, unflinching tone. "The Exceller fleet remains in disarray. However, they are beginning to reposition their forces. They have deployed several smaller vessels in an attempt to restore localized communication links." Ward's eyes narrowed as she stared at the tactical display, where blips representing the Exceller ships were scattered like broken shards of glass. "We bought ourselves time, but not much." Lieutenant Crows looked up from his console, his brow furrowed. "Captain, we're hanging on by a thread here. If they come back in force, I don't think we'll be able to hold them off." Ward knew he was right. The Spectre was a powerful ship, designed for stealth and precision strikes, but it was never meant to withstand the sheer overwhelming firepower of an entire Exceller fleet. They had survived this long by outsmarting the enemy, by playing to their strengths and exploiting the Exceller's weaknesses. But with their ship on the verge of collapse and the enemy fleet still very much alive, their options were dwindling. "Ghost, what's the status of the rest of the fleet?" Ward asked, referring to the scattered remnants of the human resistance forces still fighting across the galaxy. "There are reports of several resistance cells mobilizing in response to our actions here," Ghost replied. "However, most of them are still in the early stages of organization. It will be some time before they can mount a coordinated offensive." Ward exhaled slowly. Time. That was the one thing they didn't have. The bridge fell into a tense silence as the weight of the situation settled over the crew. They had dealt a crippling blow to the Exceller war machine, but the fight was far from over. And now, with their ship on the brink of destruction, the question loomed large. How much longer could they hold out? Then, from the comms panel, a faint signal crackled to life. It was distorted, weak, but unmistakably human. "This is the Dauntless, calling the U.S. Spectre. Repeat, this is the Dauntless. We're receiving your distress signal. Do you copy?" Ward's heart leaped in her chest. The Dauntless, one of the few remaining human warships still operational. Reinforcements. "We read you, Dauntless," Ward replied, her voice steady despite the flicker of hope now igniting within her. "What's your status?" "We've been engaging Exceller forces in the outer sectors, but we've sustained heavy damage," came the reply. "We're low on power, and our weapon systems are nearly offline, but we've picked up your fight and we're moving to assist." Ward exchanged a glance with Cruz, who managed a weary smile. Reinforcements, perhaps not enough to win the war, but enough to keep them in the fight a little longer. Ghost, Ward said, her tone resolute. What's the nearest Exeter target we can hit before they re-establish their command? There is an Exeter command cruiser positioned just beyond the debris field from the destroyed relays, Ghost responded. It is attempting to gather what remains of the fleet and restore tactical oversight. If we eliminate that cruiser, it will delay their regrouping efforts. Ward nodded. Set a course. Dauntless, you're with us. We're going for their command cruiser. Understood, Spectre, the Dauntless replied, then a voice tinged with grim determination. We'll do what we can. The Spectre shuddered as it changed course, its engines straining under the damage they had taken. But the ship pressed on, hurtling toward the heart of the Exeter fleet once more. This time, it was not about victory, it was about survival. About striking one last blow against an enemy that had ruled the stars for too long. The Dauntless, though limping, joined the Spectre, its presence a reminder that humanity, though fractured, was still fighting, still resisting, and together, these two warships, battered and scarred, would make their final stand. As they neared the Exeter command cruiser, the scale of the task ahead became painfully clear. The Exeter ship was massive, bristling with weapons and protected by a web of smaller support ships that swarmed around it like a hive of wasps. Taking it down would not be easy, especially in their current state. Ghost, what's our best approach? Ward asked, her mind racing through the possibilities. The command cruiser is heavily shielded and well defended, Ghost replied. However, I detect an energy fluctuation in their forward shields, likely a result of the disruption to their communication network. It's a small window, but if we time our attack correctly, we may be able to penetrate their defenses. Ward nodded, her hands tightening on the armrests. Then that's our shot. Dauntless, are you picking this up?